A discussion on the future of the DAO. This is going to be moderated by our good friend Eugene, and then each of you will have the opportunity to introduce yourself. Eugene.
Thank you. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to ask you to join me in a round of applause for our wonderful technical team that's been supporting us all day today. Now, DAOs. You may recall that we started this conference with a discussion about D-Vote, which is a voting tool for many decentralized autonomous organizations to come. All of them have certain things in common, and one of them, clearly, is the need to express their choices, to vote for candidates, for solutions, for budget expenditures, for color of their walls in the office, whatever needs to be voted on. So we already did some talking about that. And today, to continue that discussion, we have a number of very distinguished individuals here on the panel, and allow me please to start with a round of introductions, and then each of them will briefly tell you about what specifically they are involved in terms of their activity with respect to DAOs. So on my left here is Dennis O'Neill, who is the founder of O-Links Corporation. This company is provider of cloud-based messaging services. Dennis was for quite some time an ICO advisor on several projects from 2016 through 2019. And since then, he refocused his efforts on implementation of DAOs. Just think about that, guys. We have somebody who actually does that every single day. For example, now he's currently working on a musician community DAO and a voting DAO using the parliamentary model of Robert's Rules of Order, but scaled for global use. I don't know if anyone has even attempted to do that before. He has had executive positions in several international companies in the business communications industry. He is also a CISSP and a GBA certified blockchain consultant. So, Dennis. The next on the panel here is Torben Andersen. He is the co-founder and chief operating officer and also head of consulting. He's wearing many hats like me for a company called Rewired.one. Make a note. Rewired.one is a blockchain professional services firm active in the United Kingdom, in the US, and in Australia. Just think of the distances he has to travel sometimes. They all specialize in blockchain consulting services, end-to-end project delivery and engineering for government agencies, large enterprises, and also startups. So that's Torben. Next to Torben, we've got Eugene Karp. Eugene is the Chief Executive Officer of Architect. Architect is a boutique but full-service engineering and business technology firm that provides digital platform engineering and software development services across many industries in the United States. So please welcome our panelists. Now, let me start with some questions. Dennis, the first one will go to you. As you dive into the design and development of DAOs, what surprised you the most?
Well, it was the complexity of it, the first thing we have to understand. So I use Aragon as a platform by which to launch DAOs. And you'll see a button up in the top right, and it says something like, launch my DAO. Sounds good, just click on that. But when you get into developing a DAO that is going to take Robert's Rules of Order and have that scale from a nonprofit organization to the United Nations, World Economic Forum propositions, it becomes really an endeavor. So that's the first thing that we have to understand, is that the DAO is actually a culmination of everything that we heard about over the past several days. And I feel that the DAO is actually the destination that Satoshi, the journey that Satoshi set us on back in his 8-page white paper in 2008, and then was expanded on by Vitalik Buterin in 2014, where he mentions decentralized autonomous organization. It is actually the destination, and it is because it uses all the components that we have seen: Bitcoin, blockchain, NFT, voting, decentralization, everything that we've heard about. So I think it's really, really exciting to have this session and to hear more about actual implementations.
Dennis, one more question. For those who are just attempting to implement DAO for whatever reason they need, what are the challenges that people face?
Well, the challenge, I think, first is that we have to understand that there is Web 2 and Web 3. So the DAO can really be implemented entirely on Web 3, which is a different set. I'll talk a little bit about those tools and platforms. But there still has to be a bridge to Web 2. So like, for instance, Robert's Rules of Order, the MyDAO, is called robsrules.dao. That is a domain that I picked up from Unstoppable Domains, kind of a GoDaddy of Web 3. And if you go on ViewBlock, which is like a browser with WordPress into it, then you can actually find robsrules.dao. But that's not really where you stop. You now have to say, well, I've got to bridge it to Web 2, because that's where everybody is. Everybody's over on Google or Firefox. So I have that as well. So these have to integrate together. And there's a couple of challenges too. One is infrastructure. When you have a DAO that, for instance, is investing, when they make a decision, that's a whale. I mean, that is a lot of transactions coming across, buying a particular or selling a particular currency, and so that's a consideration. And also, as Eugene mentioned, DAOs do have this voting concept, right? The community is actually governing the DAO, the organization. But guess what? People have voters fatigue. And this is, yeah, I think maybe Eugene will talk even a little bit.
Voter apathy, we call it.
Okay. And so these are challenges that we all have to consider when we're going to the DAO, but don't lose sight of how significant the DAO is today, and how significant it will be in 2023 and beyond. What we saw with the Ukraine soldier was not just epic, it was historic. So the decentralized autonomous organization is quickly becoming accepted as a business unit, and will continue to be really powerful in our future.
You mentioned something about the tools. What tools you're focusing on, and what do people need to know about them? Right.
So when you first started DAO, you of course can just use Solidity, running on Hardhat, create your DAO. But then there's also DAO Stack, which is a good choice. I mentioned that I use Aragon because I can bring in other smart contracts into Aragon and add additional functionality, which I definitely will have to do with the robsrules.dao. So then you have to think about, how am I going to handle voting, right? Because if everybody's on chain, believe me, it's expensive. It costs a lot of money to do a vote on Ethereum. So I will be using SafeStack Snap, actually, which is Gnosis and a voting facility that actually runs on IPFS. So this really it allows the voting to be off-chain, and that's very significant. And then you can bring it on and make one transaction that goes on-chain. So these are the kinds of tools. You have to think through them. I couldn't list them all.
We actually agree that that part of actually the vote itself and then everything else that actually gets the voter to where he or she votes is in many instances not decentralized today. Like we had our wonderful colleagues at the Nephi Club help us with the web application, right? It is centralized for now, but I must tell you, and this is our personal opinion, that the voting apps will only be universally accepted when they are fully on-chain, when there is not even a possibility of doing anything in an untraceable way. So blockchain gives us a wonderful opportunity to record everything immutably and forever, and therefore any action with respect to the vote, even identification of the voter, without of course letting public know the actual identity, must be done on chain. But that's a little bit down the road. Thank you, thank you. Let me torture Torben for a little bit. And to help him with that, here's the remote. So Torben actually prepared some slides for us, which I will ask him to talk about, and then I'll ask a few questions. Torben, the floor is yours.
I think maybe I just want to build on real quick, if I can, on what Dennis said, just to bring the DAO alive for people, because as you said, it's a combination of what we've been learning over the last couple of days. And I think the power of DAO is it really starts to bring together all the different components of blockchain technology and starts to really impact communities and economies and governance. And in a moment, I'll show an example of a community that I'm involved in called the Eden Community. It's an experiment with a new form of, or some different rule sets of democracy. Because to a large extent, if you're working on the Robert rules, but also like another example is how much has democracy allowed to have been tested in the wild? Like how many times are we still inspired to learn about how different it could be? Or can we test it in the wild and see, what works, what doesn't work? It's a bit monopolized right now from a government perspective, but what can we learn by running democracy in the wild? So,
guys, we need the next slide, please.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so what I'm going to do now is just show you a really quick example. This is round one of the Eden elections that I participated in. I won't be able to show you everything today. You can Google it or we can talk about it afterwards. But this is round one of 3 rounds. And what we had to do was come to consensus about the allocation of funds. And so we debated and we each presented our viewpoints about funding. Now, why is this important? We're at a sustainability conference. How well are we allocating, for example, funds, public funds? And in a sense, these are public funds because this is within the community. My idea developed consensus, and I was allowed to go to the next round. So if we can have the next slide. Okay, so this is just to mention, this was me actually winning that first round. I was in group 7. In the bottom right, you can see the green bars, which is the level of consensus. So consensus required at least 2 plus 1 to be able to go through to the next round. In this round, I was fortunate enough to get full consensus. Now, important part of this is that this is all on-chain, all voting by each individual is all done via smart contract. And all of this sits inside this particular DAO community.
Can I ask a very quick question while you're explaining? Torben Anderson, it says voting for Torben Anderson. Are you
Yeah.
allowed to do that?
Yeah, in this, that's a great question because, and this is the experimentation that I'm talking about. These algorithms are set up in a way that I am allowed to vote for myself, and I was encouraged to because it gave a consensus. But ultimately, it was actually my choice. But maybe that's something that the DAO, because they recently did make changes, it might be something the DAO decides, you know what, we don't like this vote for yourself thing, so let's remove that. And if there is consensus, then actually the rule sets for the actual democratic process itself then alters. So I hope that's an interesting point. And then just finally, final slide. So I did make it to the next round. What was really cool about this was I ran against Brock Pierce, who's, I believe, a senator in Vermont. He has run for US president before. His political career is far more advanced than mine. So we had a very long debate. We had about an hour. I didn't win. Brock Pierce won this round. I didn't go through to the third and final round. But the interesting thing is, in this particular democratic process, the third round was determined by randomized algorithm. So there were 4 finalists, and actually an algorithm decided who of those 4 would actually become the accountable, responsible delegate for the next term. And our current terms are 3 months. But just a final point, this particular process would scale at a national US level, and within 8 rounds, every single person in the US could participate in national elections, to just give you an idea. So I wanted to just today give a practical example. So.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. Given the situation that you're already experimenting with, running elections in your particular situation, how will DAOs, in your opinion, transform the future of organizations?
Yeah, so I think just firstly about organizations, I think we mean, possibly corporate organizations, we mean governmental bodies and agencies, we even mean communities and social impact groups. And I think though, what we're really going to see is this kind of, what I'm thinking about, like the speed of business is going to move much faster than we've ever imagined. Because essentially, the DNA of a business quite often are their people, of course, and their processes. And smart contracts allow us to bring, processes into businesses. So I think what we're going to see is we're going to see organizations moving much faster. Transparency of process. So we've spoken a lot about trust your data and transparency of process. But what about the impact of transparency of process? Because when we actually know transparently what the process is, in an organization, there is no argument like, this is a fair and democratic process. Or let's say we're doing a promotion in a corporation. I can see the process. It's on the blockchain, just as you saw that slide earlier. So I think that will bring a lot more transparency and definitely new structures.
Tell me honestly, open source or not?
For what in specific?
For anything related to a vote. Do you want everything related to a vote to be open source, open code, or not?
Do you mean the election
or
software?
There should be a proprietary element?
Well, Eden itself is completely open source. So anyone could go and download that and actually spin up their own community. Yeah.
So the answer is, thank you.
Yeah.
Open source always wins.
Yeah.
Now, we have, as you know, representatives of a lot of government organizations in this conference and beyond this beautiful building around us. So how do they start? Where do they learn? How do they get all the information they need to begin their journey into DAOs?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, I do have to plug the GBA because I think that that is a wonderful place to come. For example, independent consultants and also the business, the blockchain maturity model that our organization is also part of to help to set standards in blockchain. But practically, I think your service providers, what you got to ask for is small baby steps. Start small. Demand, a consultative advisory process to understand your solution to be a real-world solution. And start there and build small and then just learn. We really try to leave customers better off. Our job is not to stay there. And I would encourage people in the industry, any service providers, to help educate their clients while they're delivering. And that's very successful.
I want to pick up on that one. You guys all heard a representative from Massachusetts and Rhode Island speaking here, telling us that they are in the process of setting up special groups, studying groups that look into blockchain applications for government. Please be aware, GBA membership has people for you. They are available to come in and consult. Eugene, you have been working in this space for quite some time. Tell me, when would a project need to start doing their own DAO? When do people need to set it up, the existing projects?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and everybody asking this question. It's very hard to answer unless the founders, the group, understand very well their strategy altogether and understand how their community is going to work, how their governance is going to work. And I guess my advice, not to rush for that too soon.
Gentlemen, may we have a few slides that Eugene sent us so he can illustrate his answers with those? They're coming. 1 second. I know you sent us some slides. There you go. You want to go over yours?
Actually, yeah, I think we sent this slides before. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I like this slide. Stay on it for a moment.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned founders, right? Mm-hmm. Founders in an organization, in a business that are considering establishing DAO. What are the risks to them personally, if any?
Yeah, the major risk for the founders is basically giving up their rights, their prerogatives, I would say, and the governance too early. And this is what a lot of DAO faces, unfortunately, too soon, when they haven't really understand their community well enough, and they don't have a mature, their product as mature as they wish it was. Obviously, there's some technological risks. Everybody knows, about smart contracts and that there needs to be audit. But it's think of the past. Everybody more or less secure at this point about this. But the most important thing right now is the governance risk.
So you need to, in other words, before you establish a DAO, right, you need to sort of have an agreement before with most players on the team as to how this will be governed in the future, exactly, right? And only then you go and actually build,
yes,
right? Yes. With that in mind, let's imagine that we have a DAO that was set up for a particular company or a group or a university or school. What about a DAO for 450 million Americans? When is that coming?
The scale, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Talking about the scale, how scalable DAO is. And, well, I think It's a very good question. We don't have DAOs that host millions at this point, right? But we know the tool sets. We understand how it's supposed to manage. And I think the only factor right now is human factors anywhere else. We need to change the paradigm of our thinking, first of all. We still manage, a lot of organizations manage, their communication and governance from, Discord, for example, which is a great tool. But at the same time, it's something very opposite from decentralization.
Gentlemen, I have the same question for you. When are we going to have, in your opinion, USA DAO? And what needs to happen before that?
Well, I think I just gave an example of potentially, you could have many experiments of, say, democratic processes, if we're talking about a political process. But, what Eugene was talking about is there's an adoption curve, and it goes with any elements of blockchain. But I think like people often, I can't remember who quoted, but like data is the new oil. I feel like processes is the new like platinum in a way, like the new governance value, where once enough people see that a governance process is transparent, more people will jump into that because they can say, hey, I know exactly how this organizational community works. It looks fair, or I'm aligned socially, or my values aligned to this structure, and I'm willing to participate. So when, I don't know, but I think, Dennis, you've got some predictions.
What's your thinking?
I kind of do.
Yeah, you do.
Do you remember you were at some gathering, someone said Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and you said, I've heard of that, what is that? And wanted an explanation. And do you remember another gathering and you said Bitcoin and somebody came up to you and said, I've heard of that. Now we see the price on CNBC, it's a little ticker goes across constantly. Well, that is where we are going to be with the DAO. People will come up to you and ask you, what is this thing? And you've been to this session, so you can answer. But that's pretty exciting. But I believe that if a city, very soon, if a city wants to build a new library, they will do a DAO. They won't do a municipal bond and go through that nightmare. They will create a DAO and give the value of that library to the very people that are using the library. And large global enterprises, when they have a new idea, want a new product out, they will create a DAO, not another subsidiary, not another LLC, but a DAO. And I believe that it is absolutely in our future. United Nations will be creating DAOs for humanitarian efforts. So this is where we are. And that is why I said that it is, I think, the destination of the journey that Satoshi put us on.
What a wonderful conclusion of the panel. Any questions? We have literally time for a couple. We have 5 minutes left, I'm told. So if anyone wants, please, Silvio, come in.
Hello. Hey, guys. Thanks for everything you got going on here. My question, especially in face of Declaration of Unity over decentralized communities, my question is more amongst for you, tools and resources to be able to use DAOs or create DAOs, spin things up like Aragon. There's a lot of like DAO in a box type things. And what we're seeing is that multiple communities, somebody's building on Aragon, somebody's doing, let's say, an investment DAO on Syndicate.io, someone else is doing like a community DAO on something else. There's a lot of difficulty in sort of just, okay, when you set up your DAO, how do you engage your community? How do you stay on top of the community? Discord has been the go-to. There's too much noise now with things like Discord. There's more ways to maybe incentivize collaboration or IP sharing. But some people don't necessarily want to give IP to a DAO because who does it actually belong to in the end? These are some obstacles. So I don't know if you guys could give some insights on tools, ways to collaborate, to incentivize collaboration, and ultimately ways to protect individual IP as it gets contributed to a collective.
Dennis, sounds like you're the tools expert, so maybe you take this one, unless you guys...
tools expert. Whoops. No, I like Safe Snap. That's snapshot with Gnosis. Gnosis is multi-sig capability, and snapshot is off-chain voting capability. I find that I'm investigating that severely for my particular DAO rather than using Discord. And Aragon works with it, and as others do as well. So that would be my suggestion on that. I think it's really going to work well. And there's also just another one I got yesterday, but okay. I'll talk to you later and I'll find that. But there's another solution for that. They're coming fast now. Understand, they're coming fast. Infrastructure's building, tools are developing, all in preparation for kickoff in 2023. That's my prediction.
Thank you. Next question, please.
So a quick question around voting and access. So especially as it relates to like the America DAO or like an Amera DAO, if we have everybody in the country who's supposed to be voting on this, generally we're going to start running into a problem that we don't see with a lot of DAOs, where with most DAOs that we have set up right now, everybody has access to them because you're involved in the community already. So you have access to the technology, the resources, and generally at least some level of know-how about how to be engaged in the DAO. But if we start moving traditional elections and voting for like federal offices onto a blockchain and into a DAO, aren't we going to run into some issues where some people might not have access?
Yeah.
We already have issues with access in traditional elections.
It's a great question.
And then we're going to start to see the return of
Great question.
poll
Let me
taxes
take
with
that
gas
one.
fees.
Thank you for your question. Let me take that one. Just what we're doing now with Devote, you guys understand. We're doing the NFT vote today, and by the way, we have the results in. Silvio, Kelsey, where are you guys? Be around soon. So we're starting with non-committal, any open to anyone without any identification. Just be here in the audience. That's all you need. That's the vote. The next one, we're doing the high school elections. Somebody came to me and said, we want to do school. Can we do that? Yeah, of course. Then the next gentleman came and said, well, we have a university election coming. Right? Can you help us with the university election? Then we've got the municipality. Then we've got the county. Then the state. And only then federal. So it's a great question. The answer is it will come with time and education of people. Please, and this is the last question.
Hey, how you guys doing? My question is more so geared toward tokenomics and pegging coins to whether using Bitcoin or Ethereum as your, I guess, your stable or your liquidity pool. And if you could address what are some ways that you might have been, or you and your DAOs have been addressing this in terms of creating tokenomics.
And can you get paid for voting? I hear a question behind the question.
Can you get paid for voting?
You guys want to take that one, Torben? Have you thought about tokenomics behind, and will you reward people for voting in any way? While the guys are thinking, I just want to bring everyone's attention that there's another paper by Vitalik Buterin very recently, and it talks about social tokens, which answers your question in part. Guys, anything else?
Well, what I said earlier is DAOs bring all the technology together. So smart contracts for process, governance through smart contracts, and also tokenization. So I think what we're going to see is communities really coming around digital assets, not just collectibles, where another DAO that we're working in is doing collectibles like NFTs and things, but we're going to see digital assets. And I think that the tokenomics space in DAOs is probably an evolving field. So I really appreciate that question. I think that you really have to understand the economic dynamics of your DAO, because in a sense, DAOs are democratizing economies as a whole. And so I think people don't realize that DAOs have things like money supplies and inflation rates and all these things that entire countries have. So what we find is we find client startups coming to us in a particular industry, and then finding out they're actually a financial service provider because their idea suddenly goes into the tokenomics. So I don't know if I answered the gentleman's question, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think the overall answer is yes, there has to be some tokenomics behind a DAO, but what kind really depends on what your DAO is about. And with that note, let us thank our panel discussion members for your help. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Yes, gentlemen, thank you. All right, so continuing, we have a short discussion or presentation on financial inclusion. So I'm not sure who I don't have a specific person in charge of it. So it's great, come on up, financial inclusion.
Thank you, everyone. How do I work this thing? Just want to make sure. Yes. All right. So, welcome, everybody. You know, right now we're in the midst of Web3. How many years has it been already? Like 3-4 years, I think, that people have started talking about Web3, smart contracts, blockchain. Eventually, there's going to be Web4. And I wanted to talk about kind of the limitations of crypto as it is today and how it can start to serve the people and how it can go mainstream. So just show of hands, Bitcoin's been around for over 10 years now, 11. How many people here are using it in everyday transactions? Okay, what kind? Like going to the store? Paying, just online usually, right? Okay, it's the kind of things that we normally look at being used every day is like Facebook, Twitter, you know, Telegram, people using stuff all the time. So for crypto to go mainstream, there have to be several things that happen. And one of those things is it has to be scalable. It has to actually be able to support millions of people transacting at the same time. So that's one thing that I think will be coming, and that's part of the Web 4. Another thing is serving communities. So a lot of the time, crypto is peer-to-peer, right? The applications that we have today are sort of, you can think of as like first generation or second generation, where we're talking about Uniswap, where you're swapping with a bot, right, or a market maker, or maybe, you know, lending marketplace, where you're lending to someone. So you have a need, someone else has a need, you're matched, you do your thing, you're done, right? But crypto can do so much more. Crypto can power elections in the future, voting. We have a voting group at GBA, right, and talks about how we can have secure elections. Crypto can power governance with DAOs, but it can also go much further and have entire communities transacting in their own coin. So let's talk about financial inclusion by talking about how we can include everybody in this sort of permissionless, autonomous, we can say, technology, right? So what do we have today? We have essentially a top-down approach. Every organization is led by some team, some people, and you kind of have to trust them. When you give money to an NGO, you know, there's audits, and you got to make sure that the money's not going to the wrong things. When you're giving money to an endowment or a university that you used to go to, you want to know that the money's going to reach the students or something, you know, something helpful. Crypto has a power to reach people directly on the ground. Everybody can get the stipend, let's say. You can fund directly. Today, we can help refugee populations by directly cutting out what would normally be the middleman and directly giving the refugees crypto money. And they can go to the store and cash it out. So I'll talk about that. Okay, but let's start with online communities. So there's a lot of online communities, right? The influencers have YouTube channels, Twitter accounts, Facebook groups, Reddit forums, all these things. What do they want to do? They all want to grow, attract more members, make money, right? And create a sort of vibrant social network and as well as an economic network as well. So how can they do that? How can they monetize their user base and grow? One thing that they can do is issue their own currency. Now, there are already certain things, like people on Reddit are, rewarded with karma points, and well, what can you really do with those, right? Not that much. They are centralized, they live on Reddit, but what if you could use the blockchain? What if you could use, imagine all the people on Reddit being able to monetize their karma points, right? That's an example. Real world communities. Think about all of the Starbucks loyalty points, right? Think of Disney dollars. There are some cities out there that have their own currency today, like Berkshires, Massachusetts. Berkshires, Massachusetts has a currency. Does anybody know what it's called? Berkshires. There's also Ithaca Hours. There are across the pond in Britain, there's several cities like Bristol pounds, Brighton pounds. So these are currencies that circulate within the city. Imagine if your school that you went to, the college that you went to, had its own alumni network and its own coin, okay? And through that network, the alumni could help the next generation of students, right? This could work not just for colleges, it could work for online organizations. New poets, new artists could be subsidized in their work. They could focus on their work because some royalties from other artists could be shared through the community. So inclusion often means community. And around the world, it's really, really important, especially when people are unbanked, right? You give them this technology and they have access to something. If you're homeless, you can get a $50 Android phone and then have the job board on there, certain jobs that homeless can do easily, sweep the streets, hand out flyers, those kinds of things that could be on there. But they could also have access to things like, for example, showers, right? Mental care as well, health care. They can also have a place to stay, kind of like book it. And they can have a universal basic income or something where they actually have money that they can go spend locally. So I'm going to talk about how to get from here to there, how to get a city with no currency to have one. Well, step one is launch the currency, right? Have the technology to do so. And there's many technologies these days. Some are more scalable than others. Blockchain is inherently hard to scale, and that's because it's a chain of blocks. Blockchain is a chain of blocks. And those blocks are limited size, right? So Roger Ver wanted to increase the size. For example, he supported Bitcoin Cash, right? Increase the size of the block. But that just kind of pushes the problem. If you scale the block by 5x, you're only making 5x more transactions. There was a Lightning Network, and it's trying to scale things as well. But blockchain is just inherently hard to scale. As more people join the network, the transactions get more expensive because everyone's trying to vie for that space. If your transaction's not in the block, it's not considered on-chain, right? So it's often a problem. Now there's Algorand, there's other off-chain solutions and layer 2s that people are exploring. But what most people are going to is hub and spoke models now, like Cosmos, for example, or Polkadot. They call them parachains. So a lot of the time there's this very secure blockchain in the middle, and then app chains, sort of side chains that do their own thing and eventually sync up with this main thing. And so you want to launch your own currency, and to do that, you usually do in 2 steps. The most successful way to launch a currency is to have a social network first. Think of WeChat. In the same time that Bitcoin has existed, right? WeChat went from a social network to completely taking over all the economic activity in China, consumer activity. So you go to a store, you just scan your QR code and you walk out, and that's how you pay. So what drove that is that people have social connections already on WeChat. So you just press a button, add a button that says pay, and Facebook Messenger has done this. Telegram wanted to do this with Telegram Grams, but it was considered a security because of how it was funded. So they kind of canceled it. Facebook wanted to even have Libra, but the U.S. Congress is, obviously concerned about supranational currency like that. But the point is, if you have a social network, the ease with which you can have a payment network on top is quite substantial because everyone's already using it. So first, step one would be have people on the network, right? And if you have a marketplace, you can introduce your own currency that people pay their piano teacher and their tutor or whatever in this thing. The question is, why would people accept it? And that's kind of the next point. So you got to put the currency in the hands of your members, right? Whether you're a small village or whether you are an alumni network or whether you're a city. So at Intercoin, I'm the CEO of Intercoin. We've spun it out about 4 years ago from our social networking company. Intercoin, we help cities to develop their own currency. I spoke to a mayor of a small town in Florida. I spoke to people in Las Vegas about Las Vegas coin. The mayor of Twin Harbors, Minnesota, is famously going around wants to have their own coin. And even, as you've probably heard, who's heard of Miami coin, New York City coin, right? That's a project that was named after the city, but it's not really used in the city, like it's not accepted by vendors in the city. Anyone can, there's a New York City coin from 2014. But the idea is nice, but it has to move away from speculation, just speculative buying and selling based on where the price is gonna go, because that's a zero-sum game. For someone to win, someone else has to lose because the money has to come from somewhere, okay? So you all enter into the exchange, some person walks away with more, therefore someone has to walk away with less. At some point you run out of people to come in, you have to have real utility. And that's what this is about, utility, people actually paying for goods and services. Now a lot of the time what you see is, you think that currency is being backed by gold, or it's being backed by some asset or valuable papers and so on. And Tether has the accounting of what they're backed by. And everyone's heard what happened with Luna, right? The algorithmic stablecoins are in a unique situation where if the assets go down, that really, what can the algorithm do? So when you have a real currency though, currency is being exchanged for goods and services. Ultimately, goods and services are in demand by definition. People are serving each other. They're serving each other food, they're serving each other products, and that's what they're going to need. So even if there is, God forbid, a recession or a depression in the United States, the cities that have their own currency will be able to thrive relative to others. Because if there's a plumber sitting and he can fix a leak, but he's not going to because the people can't pay him with US dollars, if there's a complementary currency there, suddenly they can go and fix the leak. So economic activity and money velocity is really important to maintain. And a lot of times that's hard. People don't talk about this. They talk when people leave cities because of the pandemic. So in droves, people leaving cities, there was a lot of criticism. But how many articles did you read about small towns being emptied out for 10 years, right? There's a lot of capital and people leaving small towns. So a lot of small towns across America and around the world could use their own currency. Currency is different than issuing bonds. Bonds is the bill comes due and then you're in a worse place if you haven't been able to service that debt or invest in your community to create. And so there's going to be some good communities that go up and there's communities that go down. So what do you do with the ones that go down? So the other thing they can do is they can issue their own currency, which doesn't create debt. But what it does is create access to their economy. The only way you can spend the currency is by visiting the city. If you have some extra currency, you can give it to your neighbor who can go visit Disney World or whatever the city is. So you reward people for doing things you want, like inviting new people. Give them some currency if those people are valuable members. And they help to contribute. Reward people for positively reviewed contributions. So a tokenomics online would be like, you pay for advertising, you pay for posting your content. And if people upvote your content and they like it, you get money back. It's just like I pay for advertising my business, and if the refugees come, let's say, with the refugee coin and they decide to pay in my business, then I get that money back. So in a way, advertising and posting things and getting people's attention is costly, and you can, if what you're doing is good, you're gonna get that money back. But that's how the community can actually start kickstarting demand for its currency, is the advertising. So if you have local businesses, the people I spoke to, for example, in Surfside, Florida, you know, it's a big Jewish community. They have businesses. The businesses, the small businesses, the backbone of the community. So if the businesses can advertise to the tourists and others, right, they'll spend the local currency to do so. If people can ride the bus using the local currency, and so on. Taxes on pollution, taxes on congestion. Those are things that can actually create demand for the local currency. And then your piano teacher will take it because they have to pay their taxes or ride the bus or do any of the other things that I spoke about. So universal basic income is a big movement. Just out of curiosity, how many people here know about UBI? Wow, that's a fair, say half of you. You know, do you support it in general? Like, keep your hands up if you do. Okay, so pretty much everyone is sort of, UBI is sort of this thing that gets support from the left and the right of the political spectrum. You know, Milton Friedman, who was a pretty financially libertarian, consequentialist libertarian, he liked UBI because it didn't create disincentives to work. If you have welfare and it's means tested, you might get too much money and lose your welfare check. So, for example, there's also things like disability. People may not be disabled anymore, but you know, are you going to just say, okay, I don't need the check anymore? UBI is unconditional, so if you're on the right, you want people to have an incentive to work also. If you're on the left, you're also talking about, for example, human dignity in the sense of like, well, people just being able to, Martin Luther King talked about this a lot, just getting a floor, regardless of, you know, here in the United States, you have to work for a corporation to get health care sometimes, to get health insurance. Many other countries, you get a universal health insurance. So that's the same idea, except rather than just being earmarked for health, it could be for whatever you want. It's like school vouchers, but for everything, right? So it's not a single payer system because they don't restrict you how you spend it. So step 3, once you've given it to the people, then they have it. It's like the banking system gave you credit cards. You go to the vendors. And there was a time when vendors didn't trust credit cards. I think in the 70s and 80s, Visa, MasterCard, they had to do the work. They had to get the credit card machines into the, you know, there's not fiat currency. No one has to accept it. Fiat currency is legal tender. Legal tender laws were passed and said, okay, the greenback used to finance the Civil War, right? The greenback later became legal tender. That means if you offer these things and you had a debt, you could satisfy the debt with that. So the government stepped in and said, you can't demand gold, you can't demand other things if that was. That's not the case for bank money. That's not the case for credit money. And it's not the case for the local currency. You have to do the work. You have to create the circles, the cycles, okay, the virtuous cycles. And so we have economists on our show, Intercoin show, every Wednesday at 12. If you're interested, you could come talk to me. Intercoin helps cities, communities, if you ever want to have your own coin. That's what we do. So we've had to speak to a lot of economists, including the grandson of Milton Friedman, Patri Friedman. He's very involved with the Seasteading Institute. He started that with Peter Thiel and other things. He carries on the legacy of Milton Friedman. I interviewed Noam Chomsky this Monday, and just there's a whole spectrum of people that, you know, there's community economists around the world that want to see local communities thrive. And so you need the technology to pay out employees, to have contests, because you might not know who will solve the problem, but you want to put money together as a community, and you have judges to decide who solves the problem best. So these kinds of things, paying out, you can earn credits from customers who visit your store, and you can pay for advertising, and people can give each other ratings and reviews. Notice all of this, I know this is called the Government Blockchain Association, right? But a lot of the government functions are starting to be possible in technology, right? So we're talking about DAOs and voting and things like this. And that's normal. Technology has always done this. Printing used to be, you had to require the imprimatur, you know, the thing that allowed you to print anything. And now anyone can print on a desktop printer. And so, you know, but what if you print seditious material? Well, you know, now people have made peace with that to some extent. But the point is, you know, people have blogs, people have personal phones, computers, things that just in the last 20 years, there used to be AT&T, right? The phone companies, the telcos would charge you $3 a minute to talk. And along came Skype, right? Along came voice over IP, the internet, dropped the cost to zero, basically, effectively. So we're all used to that now, but it's just 20 years ago, we were reluctant to call somebody just on a one-on-one phone call. So technology helps to distribute the money, to drive costs to zero and make it more efficient, but we need to serve the people, the communities. That's what financial inclusion should mean, not just people trading, but people using it as a currency, people making decisions together. Finally, if you have your own currency, you want people to buy it. We're talking about like you visit Disney World and you buy the currency, right? If you have your own conference, like this conference, right? You go, so in this conference, what you do is you buy a ticket to the conference. So you're spending bank money already, right? Why not buy some internal currency? Think about it. What are you going to do after this conference? You're going to go home and go to some other conferences, right? But what if this conference would have an extended community? After you leave, you're part of a growing snowball of people that has ever come to GBA conferences, right? It would play a more important part in your life, which already, we have the website now. But besides the website, you could have, you know, you're talking about the GBA coin and other things. It creates a sort of in-group feeling, but more importantly, a smart economy. So we can actually find people in an internal marketplace, and we can find resources and connect. The same is true for alumni organizations of any kind. Think of your school. You went to your college, right? You went to your high school. What if they had an alumni program? Have you ever got a call saying, can you donate like 20 bucks, 50 bucks to your alumni, right? Did you ever do it? Right? Some people do. But the thing is, they could get a lot more over the lifetime of the alumni relationship if they created a network that persisted after you left college, after you left high school. Do you know how much money they could be raising from alumni if the alumni were still felt like it was part of it? How many? Oh, you said? Oh, I'm sorry. So I'm going to just wrap up in 1 minute. Good. Okay. Isolated networks, they have a network effect that's limited. So what we do is we help them create their own network, and then we help them link all of them into one big internet of coins, the Intercoin network. So Intercoin's been a project for about 4 years. We help them to also understand their economy, understand why prices are spiking, and make decisions democratically in order to figure out how much UBI to give, how much, basically what to do as a community. It's very important for every community to do this, especially as a recession's coming on. And that's important because the communities need to have their own monetary policy and their own economic activity, regardless of what's going on around them. They need to be able to serve each other. So thank you very much. If you want to talk more, I'm around. And Greg Magershak.
Great, thank you. So this is a two-parter, and now we have the second part right here. Please.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. And I want to thank Greg for setting this conversation up. I think one of the most important themes here is that the conversation is around how do you make the pie bigger, not just changing a standard, because anyone can change a standard, but actually creating new value is more difficult to do. And so in this next couple minutes, I'm just going to talk about the other side of this coin, namely the role that non-fungible tokens can play in democratizing investment. So, I mean, I could spend 30 minutes going through a bunch of statistics. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to spend maybe a minute and a half and just talk about how stock market participation tends to be pretty low. How many people are investing in like an IBM and investing in, yeah, some are, there we go, that's good. I mean, because if you do, that investment will perform over the next 30 years, so it's good to do. But stock market participation is low. And it's also low across different demographic brackets. And so the plot up here is just showing that even when you break it out by income bracket and you look between white and black, you still see big discrepancies. And so it's not as if income can explain all of the differences. There is still this segmentation that we see. you can also see it, and I want to preface this by saying that being from the National AI Institute in the Department of Veterans Affairs, we look really carefully at how are we creating an ecosystem that nurtures and helps support the nation's veterans. And so if you look at between veterans and non-veterans, you also see stark differences. In particular, you see stark differences among some of the newer generation of veterans, and a little bit of the older generation. There was more of an emphasis on home ownership, and they actually were able to accumulate a lot more assets, but not so much in the past 20, 30 years. So that begs the question, why don't we invest a little bit better? Why is it that there are these persistent gaps in the stock market, in our assets? And there's different theories for this. One is that it's due to lack of information, that maybe people just don't know the sort of stocks, the sort of assets that they should be investing in. Another could be that they just don't have the disposable income, so they don't have an extra $5,000 at the end of the year to be able to put into a portfolio. But another, and this is what I would argue is probably one of the bigger ones, is the complexity and the barriers and the lack of trust sometimes. And so it really requires a lot of sophistication to be able to invest in the S&P 500 and to get all the right financial advice. And so liquidity usually is not the root cause of a problem. It sometimes is due to information, barriers, human capital, and so on. So now really the main point, I want to just leave with two key points. One is that Web3 and particularly NFTs have the potential to transform this landscape because it allows individuals to invest it allows people to invest in others and brands that they know and they trust. So let's say that you're best friends with an artist that just released a new album and has minted an NFT of it. You might not necessarily believe in the music business at large, but if you believe in your friend and trust that person, you're making a bet on that person, not on the rest of the system. And so for an individual, that's probably going to pay off a little bit more if you truly trust that individual or that brand. Likewise, let's see, I think I skipped one. Likewise, maybe you don't have enough money to buy an entire Bitcoin or entire Ethereum, but you do have the skills, the creativity to create your own NFT. And so you might go on an OpenSea, you might go on one of the NFT exchanges and create, whether it's art, whether it's music, whether it's maybe selling digital land rights. And so it empowers a content creator to then go out and build that. And then you can exchange that for a Bitcoin or an Ethereum. So I think there's some broad lessons that emerge from these distributed ledger technologies that are broad, that we should be paying attention to. And these are just a couple of examples of how it can lead to greater financial inclusion, greater economic mobility without changing things around standards. So everybody is brought up. And one of the things, just to kind of leave a last thought here, is around competition. You see how the tech sector has sometimes gotten a little bit monopolistic in certain areas, and Web3 has the potential to truly transform that because it's bringing a decentralized body of creators and inventors together. So with that, I know we've got a keynote in another minute or 2 minutes or 30 seconds, so I'm just going to stop here, but happy to chat after the keynote and whenever for the rest of the day. Thanks so much for your attention.